Ghana's Ministry of Finance says the exchange of US dollar denominated bonds was approximately 92% as $741.7 million worth of old bonds out of $809 million were tendered for new ones. Meanwhile, the government is extending the settlement date of the alternative offer exchange to the 4th of next month. Richmond Frimpong, financial advisory consultant, joins me now for more on this. Thank you, Richmond, for joining us today.
Thank you, Esther.
Well, the government has come a long way with the domestic debt exchange program, and to record this rate of over 90%. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think if you take a cue from the first program, you notice that three things were on the table. One is value, two is tradability, and the third is liquidity. In the second round of the debt exchange, you notice that all these three were quite competitive, and particularly for the pension funds that were the biggest percentage of the entire program. It looked quite good in terms of value and even in terms of liquidity and tradability. And so that accounts largely for why it has been quite successful. Above 90% looks good.
All right, and now we've had this conversation on our shows. We followed this process right from the beginning and watched, participation increase. We've, witnessed some of the skirmishes, especially with the pension funds, but everyone has come to the table. So the big question now is what next? What comes next after this? We know that at some point Ghana will have to begin to engage with bilateral creditors. We also know that a creditor committee has been formed. I think that was earlier this year. I think that was in May. Chaired by China and France, and it looks like there's some willingness to at least engage on some level. But what are your thoughts in terms of how the Ghanaian government should begin to engage creditors under the G20 framework for debt treatment?
I think at the moment, the most critical anchors that needed to be ticked have been ticked. The phase 1 and the phase 2 are quite critical. IMF's goal with this whole program was to look at debt sustainability, and then also to look at the macroeconomic stability, and most importantly, high and inclusive growth. At the moment, I think it is a good sign for the creditor committee to now begin to see that the debt sustainability part that was going to be a deal breaker has been cleared, looking at the two programs. And so that will make that phase work quite well. What the government should be paying attention to are the two critical ones, the reforms that are to the heart of the economy, particularly on the fiscal side. And if those things are cleared, it works. IMF is in town sometime September, and probably looking at the success we have chalked in the phase 2, they are likely to draw down the second tranche.
All right. So I'm just thinking about how all of this feeds into the overall aim of fiscal prudence, debt sustainability, and just, a stronger economy for Ghana. We know that inflation is still a challenge. There's a cost of living crisis. And I must also mention that not only Ghana experiencing this, and generally in sub-Saharan Africa, monetary authorities have been grappling with high interest rates, trying to tame inflation. But are you seeing green shoots, as it were? And in what areas are you seeing that Ghana can point to and say, yes, this program with the IMF is indeed working?
I think two critical things. The reforms must look at the discipline on the fiscal side of government. At the moment, you can tell that even on the debt market, you see Treasury bill is seeing a high uptick. As at the last auction, the 91-day bill was trading at a high of 27%, and that is quite high. So I think the government should pay attention to the discipline and the reforms on the fiscal side. Again, if you look at the monetary side, the Bank of Ghana has been hit critically, and you see their equity chances are going negative. Another good thing is that reform restructuring should help them to correct that on the monetary side, so that the financial services sector can also correct itself. All this should play into a lot more discipline. And the good thing is that every 6 months, the fund is in town to check the government to make sure they are doing what they have to do before they can make any drawdowns.
But we know that, and the country, IMF country rep for Ghana has said that he's indeed pleased with the progress Ghana has made so far. This could unlock that $600 million. How soon, I don't want to preempt, how it's going to play out, but in your opinion, how soon can Ghana begin to tap this cash?
I think post the September visit, ideally, if it's a 6-month cycle, then it shouldn't pass November. Ghana should be able to assess the drawdown for the next 600 cycle.
Right. Now, for the monetary authorities who are trying to bring down inflation and strengthen the cedi, talk to us about what you see ahead and their efforts so far and how it's impacting the strength of the cedi.
I think so far you can see that the balance of payment challenges have been corrected. And if nothing changes, cocoa bills, very critical. You see that the central bank was hit on their price stability efforts with the cocoa bill difficulties they face. Thankfully, the exchange program has corrected the cocoa bills and there has been some good success in there. What it means is that now when the next 600 baht comes, the central bank will be able to stabilize the supply side of the forex, and that will keep some very good pricing in terms of how the cedi is doing on the market. And so it looks as if going into the next few months, the next few days, we are going to see some fairly good stability on the forex. And then if that happens, you will see that the pass-through effects that fights the price of fuel and coal can be corrected. And when that happens, inflation possibly can be stayed.
Well, I've asked other analysts this on this, the whole debt restructuring and how Ghana got here in the first place. What are the key lessons that you believe come out of this? We've seen in the past the likes of Greece that come to memory for me, Greece and Jamaica, but we saw how that impacted on the overall economy, the purchasing power of citizens, inflation, etc. But for you, what have been the key lessons?
I think the key lessons for Ghana should be the independence on managing the monetary policy side of the entire economic structure. And that hasn't really been straight. And I think the reforms, the structural reforms, should really pay attention to making the central bank a little bit more independent, so that in terms of the printing, in terms of the funding, going beyond the 5% a stay will not be abused. And then on the fiscal side, government should be as disciplined in terms of the expense side, and it should be backed by productivity. Thankfully, we can have that for the next 3 years, but when that ends, in terms of the program, the learning should be that government should stick to the discipline on managing the fiscal side.
We've talked a lot about the government. Let's talk about Ghanaians and the everyday Ghanaians and how this has impacted on their way of life, cost of living, etc. We know that there have been a number of tax reforms, utility bills continue to go up, etc., still feeding into inflation. And when you say that pass-through effect, maybe in the next couple of months we could see inflation come down. I'm a little skeptical about that, but we'll leave it at that. But let's talk about the Ghanaians and just the pressure on consumption, etc. What are you seeing? And also, are expectations high on the part of Ghanaians on what the government should be doing as by way of sort of alleviating, if you will, some of the pressures that they're experiencing?
I think the Ghanaians should be looking forward to doing something on themselves in increasing their own earning powers, because largely you can tell that the policies that are kicking in are not going to turn inflation southwards for any big basis points. Inflation is not going to turn all of a sudden down by about 300 basis points. It may not happen. And so for the Ghanaian, good money habits is what you need to apply and increase your earning powers if you can, as much as possible, so that any little amount that you earn, you'll be able to take it home and use it well. You can tell that because of this same program, we are not going to see utility prices coming down anytime soon, because it is one of the requirements of the fund. So good money habits is what the Ghanaians should be looking forward to applying to their daily earnings, because cost of living is still going to be quite high in this period.